Have you ever saved someone's life? How did it happen? I heard a faint domestic fire alarm one night that wouldn't quit, so I walked down the street to identify where the alarm was coming from. I knocked on the door but there no answer. I couldn't smell smoke or feel heat off the door but decided to call the fire brigade just in case. They arrived pretty quickly and I pointed out which unit the alarm was coming from. They walked up to the door, then ran back to the truck to grab a door banging opening thingo and the hose reels. Next thing, all the smoke is pouring out the front door and they're carrying an old lady down the stairs. Then another fiery emerged carrying the lady's cat. Turns out she had turned on the stove to cook dinner but fell asleep. The unit was filled with smoke and she would have asphyxiated. But both she and the kitty survived. She wrote me a lovely note thanking me. Which was noise. Moral of the story is to pay attention to noises/things that are out of place. It's better to be safe than sorry. And look after each other. I don't know if this really fits. I needed a kidney. My cousin volunteered. During their testing of her, they found a small mass they thought was just fat. It turned out to be cancer. Most kidney cancer apparently is not caught until it's too late because your other kidney takes on the work and you don't get symptoms. She was able to get it all removed and is now cancer-free, didn't even need chemo. Just surgery. Anyway. She claims I saved her life. I claim she saved her own by being willing to donate. I told my father he has to go see a doctor or I would force him. He was super tired all the time. Turns out he had cancer and his liver was about to fail. Was in the middle of a neighborhood pool and watched a toddler at the side of the pool 10 feet and take his floats off and then jump in the water. He curled up like a ball and began to sink quickly. I was able to reach him before he reached the bottom. He was scared but screaming. The babysitter was on her phone. When I was probably about 12 or 13, I saved my 4-year brother's life. We were in Oregon for spring break as a family and were watching the ocean waves on the beach. Suddenly an enormous rogue wave came out of nowhere and it pushed us all the way up the beach and against the cliffs. As the water rushed out, I saw my brother tumbling in the surge, so I lunged and grabbed him with one arm and held on for dear life to a big rock with the other. My shoes, jacket and wallet along with other family members' belongings were all swept out to sea. But I still have a brother. Scuba. The zip tie that holds the mouthpiece onto the regulator broke, and when the diver exhaled, the regulator popped out of the rubber mouthpiece and fell off to the side. The diver didn't notice until they exhaled all their air and then tried to inhale. They freaked and tried to bolt for the surface from about 120. I grabbed them with one hand and tried to shove my spare regulator into their mouth, but they wouldn't spit out the useless rubber mouthpiece. A fellow dive instructor grabbed me and anchored himself to the mooring line, so we stopped ascending. I free-flowed my spare regulator into the diver's rubber mouthpiece and that got him to snap out of it and register what I was trying to do. He spit his mouthpiece out, stuffed my regulator into his mouth, took a big breath, and tried to bolt for the surface again. I stayed clamped to him and my partner stayed clamped to me and the mooring line. Eventually the guy calmed down and got himself back under control. After which we made a controlled ascent. I am a doctor. Even then I can count the number of times I can say I've saved someone's life on one hand with fingers left over. I was working at an athletics event. After a long-distance running event that was open entry, a person collapsed and stopped breathing. I worked with my team to stabilize them and transfer them to hospital. They needed support for their airway to keep breathing. Had they not had it, they would have asphyxiated and died. I met them with their spouse and 8-year-old child a few months later, actually on this day a few years ago. That was the biggest reward for me. The best feeling. One day in college. I was on my way to grab dinner with some friends and ran into another friend in the parking lot. I invited him to come with me and join us. And we proceeded to have a totally unremarkable dinner in the CAF. Years later. Post-graduation. We were hanging out one night getting a bit drunk and stoned, and he confessed to me that he was on his way to kill himself that night when I ran into him. When I was in middle school, my dad took me to one of his friend's barbecues. His friend had a young son that I think was 4 or 5 at the time. Everyone had been swimming in the pool and went in the yard to go eat. No one saw the little kid run back to the pool except for me. Before I could say anything, he jumped in without his swim mice. I ran as fast as I could to him as he thrashed in the water. And I pulled him out. His parents were absolutely shocked and terrified. They didn't think he would do anything like that. Thankfully he ended up being fine. And it scared him out of doing it again. Always watch your kids if you have a pool. Even if you think they know better. They probably don't. Kid was drowning. Lifeguard yelled at me. I jumped in the pool and grabbed him. I was the closest adult. Happened in 7 seconds. I got free pool passes. A car was on the road in front of me one night. And driving pretty quickly, we were both going over 100 miles per hour. And then I thought they were switching lanes. But they kept into the guardrail and the engine flew from the car. The battery ended up somewhere in the woods. The first responders found it while surveying the damage, and they were lucky I was there. Dude fell asleep at the wheel and his wife was in the passenger seat and their 16-year-old son was in the back. This was at maybe 3 a.m. on a deserted stretch of highway in Virginia. He broke his leg and was bleeding pretty badly from his face and the bone poking through his calf. Luckily, his brain wasn't mush and he was aware enough to converse with. His wife's airbag didn't go off but somehow only banged her head. And I thought she died, but thankfully she was only unconscious for a few moments and then she started to slur her speech and say what I think was "What's going on?" I never checked her pulse because I was focused on the driver. The son was in the better condition between the three of them. He was asleep in the back of the car and was perfectly fine. All their phones had disappeared. I'm sure they were all thrown from the car. I never found them. Had I not been there to witness it, and had I not stopped, dude would have bled out. The wife was in no condition to talk to anybody. And the son that was pretty much unscathed wouldn't have had a way to contact anybody to get help. It was so deserted where we were at that it took the ambulance and cops over 20 minutes to find us. I used my belt as a tourniquet on the dude's thigh. And the EMTs in the ambulance told me I did a good job doing this. I'm glad they taught us, and I paid attention to some emergency first aid training in Navy boot camp. Although I wish I had my Navy-issued belt because I would have been able to do a better job of it. I still think about this every Thanksgiving. As it happened on the Sunday night after Thanksgiving back in 2011. I hope they are doing well. Undefined. I donated bone marrow to a stranger given 2 months to live. Surprisingly easy process and haven't regretted doing it for a second. Registered during an on-campus drive and was called within the year as a match. The whole process took a couple months. And a couple hours of my time for blood tests and doctor's appointments. I highly recommend anyone interested to join a registry. The odds are low of getting selected, but the chance to save a life is worth it. I joined with Be the Match. My dad and I were on vacation in Paris a couple years ago. Walking by the river. There weren't that many people around, jet lag. We were up early. And this girl jogged by us with her dog off leash. A couple of ducks saw the dog coming about 30 feet ahead of us and went into the water. Dog goes in after ducks. Girl goes in after dog. Because it was the Seine in the middle of Paris and the banks are all paved and apparently steep. Neither of them could get up on their own right. We pulled them both out. One after the other. And then this husky the size of a dire wolf had the nerve to shake off all over us. Probably they would have figured it out if we hadn't been there. Or someone else would have heard the yelling in time to help them. Still. It's a fun story. Leash your dogs. Kids.